You remember the cold most of all, not the fear, the cold. 4 in the morning and the air had that wet, gray weight to it, the kind that gets into your boots before you've even started walking. You'd been in this unit for months, reservists, most of you, not soldiers by trade, policemen, clerks, dock workers, men who'd been handed rifles and told you were now instruments of order. You didn't know what today was going to be. Not really. Not until you were standing in formation and your commanding officer started talking. He told you what the assignment was. He said it plainly, without flourish, the way men say terrible things when they've already made peace with saying them. And then he did something you didn't expect. He said that any man who did not feel capable of this task could step out. No punishment, no consequence. Just step out of line. You had maybe 3 seconds to decide. And here's what nobody tells you about moments like that. They don't feel large. They don't feel historic. They feel like nothing. Your body moves or it doesn't. You step out or your boots stay planted in the mud with everyone else's. You stepped out. You were not the only one. And here's the part that still doesn't sit right, even now, even after everything. Nothing happened to you. Not that day. Not the day after. Not ever. Let me back up, because the 3 seconds don't mean anything without the months that came before them. You joined this battalion the way a lot of men your age joined things back then, because you were told to, because refusing had its own kind of danger, because everyone around you was doing the same and it felt less like a choice and more like weather. You weren't the fanatic. You want that understood. You didn't lie awake dreaming of glory or hating people you'd never met. You were a man in your 30s with a wife somewhere and a job that used to be ordinary, and now you wore a uniform and did what you were told, because that's what men like you did. The unit had been sent east. You'd heard rumors about what special actions meant in places like this, the way soldiers hear rumors, half believed, half dismissed, because believing them fully meant thinking about what you might be asked to do, and you weren't ready to think about that yet. Then the morning came where thinking about it stopped being optional. Your commander stood in front of several hundred of you. He was not a cruel man, as far as you knew. He was, if anything, visibly uncomfortable. His voice had a tremor in it that you'd never heard before. He explained the task. Men, women, children in a village nearby, and you and your battalion were the ones being asked to carry it out. And then he offered the way out. You've spent years turning that moment over in your mind, trying to understand why it happened the way it did, why he gave you the option at all. Some men who were there later said he seemed almost to be pleading, hoping more of you would step forward, hoping the order itself might collapse under the weight of refusal. It didn't. Only a handful of you moved. You want to tell yourself it was courage, that you thought about who these people were, men, women, children who had done nothing except be born into a life the war had decided to end, and that some deep moral compass turned you toward the only decent path available. But honesty requires more than that. In the moment, it wasn't a grand moral calculation. It was closer to a physical recoil. The same instinct that pulls a hand back from a flame before the brain finishes processing pain. You didn't know if you could live with pulling a trigger on someone who wasn't a soldier, someone who wasn't fighting back, someone who was just standing there. You didn't examine it philosophically. You just knew in your gut that you couldn't do it, and your body carried you out of the line before your mind had fully caught up. You looked around, half expecting to be alone in this. You weren't. A handful of others had done the same. Not many, perhaps 1 in every 5 or 6 men by the count historians would later piece together. Not a mass refusal, not a mutiny, just a small, quiet fracture in the formation, a scattering of men standing slightly apart from the rest, unsure what would happen to them next. You braced yourself for consequences. This was the army. Refusing a direct order was supposed to mean something. Court-martial, demotion, public humiliation at the very least. You'd heard stories, real and imagined, about what happened to men who broke ranks in moments like this. Nothing happened. You were reassigned. Guard duty at the perimeter, cordon work, transport, tasks that kept you at arm's length from what was happening in the village, but did not remove you from the operation entirely. You still heard it. You still knew. But your hands weren't the ones directly responsible for that day's list of the dead. Your commanding officer didn't reprimand you, didn't threaten you, not so much as raise the subject again. In the weeks that followed, you waited for the other shoe to drop, for someone above him to hear that men had stepped out and to decide that this could not be allowed to stand, that it set a dangerous precedent, that leniency here meant weakness everywhere. It never came. As far as the record shows, not one man was formally punished for declining that day. Not court-martialed, not imprisoned, not even meaningfully disciplined. You lived. You went home eventually when the war ended and what was left of your unit was dispersed back into ordinary life. You went back to your job, your street, your name in the town registry. Nobody came looking for you. Not for years. Not in truth for the rest of your life. Here's the thing you have to sit with, and it's not comfortable. Your refusal cost you almost nothing. A transfer to different duties, a moment of awkwardness among your peers, maybe some quiet resentment from men who felt your choice made theirs look uglier by comparison. That's it. That was the entire price. And yet the operation continued without you. Your absence from the firing line didn't save a single life. Someone else picked up the task you refused. The village's fate was the same whether you pulled a trigger or stood guard at its edge. Your conscience stayed intact. The outcome did not change. That's the part that haunts you more than the morning itself. You've met in later years men who did not step out. Men who told themselves at the time that if they didn't do it, someone else would. So what difference did it make? You used to think that reasoning was a coward's excuse. Now you understand it's also, in a colder sense, true. The machine did not need your compliance specifically. It needed compliance in general, and it had more than enough of that to go around. So what does that make your choice? Not heroic exactly, you didn't save anyone. Not meaningless either. You preserved something in yourself that many of your comrades did not. You carried that difference home with you, quietly, for the rest of your life. Some of the men who stayed in line carried something too. Not medals, not honor, but the knowledge of exactly what their hands had done. A knowledge that some of them would spend the following decades trying to not look at directly. You've thought often about the ones who didn't step out. Not with hatred. That would be too easy, too clean a way to close the door on something that deserves to stay open. You knew these men. Some of them you shared meals with, complained about the weather with, written letters home in the same breath as. They weren't monsters in any way you could point to before that morning. That's what makes the whole thing so difficult to sit with. If you can't tell the difference between a man who will step out and a man who won't just by looking at him, then the line between you was thinner than either of you wanted to admit. Some of them, you learned later, carried it quietly for the rest of their lives, a heaviness that never fully lifted even decades on, even with families and grandchildren and all the ordinary business of living stacked on top of it. Others seemed disturbingly to carry nothing at all. They folded the day into the general blur of the war and moved on, the way you might file away any other unpleasant task you'd rather not revisit. You've never been able to decide which of those two outcomes troubles you more, the ones who suffered for it or the ones who didn't. What you keep coming back to in the end is this: the system did not run on monsters. It ran on ordinary men doing what they were told, and it kept running because just enough of them kept doing it. Your refusal didn't break the machine, but it proved the machine could be refused, that the door out was real, even when almost no one walked through it. You walked away. It cost you almost nothing. It's the one thing about that entire war you can look at without flinching. And you've spent the rest of your life wondering why that wasn't true for more men standing beside you that morning. If a story like this makes you stop and think about the choices ordinary people make when no one's forcing their hand, drop a comment. What do you think you would have done standing in that line? And if this one hit you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that the smallest choice can still be the one that matters most.